Now, we'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement by recognizing that we're on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Neskaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign has a responsibility to acknowledge these native nations for us to work with them as we move forward. Secondly, this is a green certified event. Today we'll be talking about sustainability, and it's so important that we walk the walk as well. We've prioritized environmentally conscious planning in creating this event. Now, if you'd like more information on green certification and what it means, please see our website, iSEE website, for your reference. So, good afternoon to you all. I'm Gillen Wood, the Associate Director for Education and Outreach at iSEE. And it's my great pleasure to introduce and moderate today's book talk, and featuring our guest, Catherine Flowers, the focus being her book, the book Waste. Today's event is the second of 4 noontime events through Earth Month. And please put on your calendars the 2 talks that will be happening next week during Earth Week. First by Peter Glick, water scholar, on Tuesday at noon, Tuesday the 20th of April at noon. And then a talk entitled From Polio to COVID, Environmental Virology at its Best by the water virologist Joan Rose. Next Friday, April the 23rd. The future of water, our theme for the iSEE Congress this year. Water is not only a basic human need and right, but it also serves as a critical input for energy and food production. Climate change, among other things, is leading to increased hydrologic variability with a significant impact on water availability at the global, regional, and local levels. And at every level, from the local to the global, the issue of water cleanliness and availability intersects with social justice and the problem of entrenched historical inequity. And we'll hear a lot about that today. Now, before we begin, I want to thank our gracious partners in staging this Congress. First, iSEE has partners this year with the Joint Areas Center, 3 of which are funded through the US Department of Education Title VI grants, and with the Illinois Global Institute. So iSEE, the Joint Areas Center, and IGI are all deeply invested in issues surrounding the global water crisis and the need for long-term equitable solutions. And we're very excited to enter into this partnership and to be staging these events. Now I'd like to offer a few words about our panelists and our featured guest, the new Levenick iSEE resident scholar, Catherine Flowers. And the focus being the book today. We're pleased to have Mark Duey, the Chief Programs Officer at Water for People, a Denver-based nonprofit, who will give some remarks and reflections on the book. And with him, joining him will be McKenzie Johnson, who is one of our own here at Illinois, an assistant professor of natural resources and environmental sciences at the University of Illinois, whose research and teaching focuses on environmental justice. So finally, we're extremely pleased to make a virtual campus welcome to Catherine Coleman Flowers, author of this book, Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret. A nationally recognized environmental health activist, researcher, and writer, Catherine Coleman Flowers is best known for bringing the tragedy of poor and minority rural communities living without sewage infrastructure to national attention. Catherine is the founder of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice and a senior fellow for environmental justice and civic engagement at the Center for Earth Ethics at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. She was selected as a MacArthur Fellow in 2020, and in March 2021, so just last month, she was named to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Now, the book, which is the focus of our event today, this book, Waste, was named one of the best 10 science books of the year by Smithsonian Magazine. It's been excerpted in the New York Times, reviewed there, reviewed in the New Yorker, and it's provoked a huge level of interest and discussion, which we'll be continuing today. Earlier this year, the Institute for Sustainability was pleased to offer a virtual resident scholar position to Catherine through the Levenick Fellows Program in Sustainability Leadership. So we're so excited to have her here on campus and for her to share with us her unique life story and history of her environmental activism with us here on campus. Now, the structure of the event today, I'll stop talking in about 15 seconds and hand it over to, first of all, Mark Duey, who will give some remarks and reflections on his reading of the book, followed by McKenzie Johnson, who will do the same. Well, then Catherine herself will talk in response, will respond to Mark and Mackenzie's remarks, and then we'll open it up to a roundtable conversation among the three of them. At about 20 minutes before the hour, I'll open up the conversation to questions from the audience, and we're so glad that you've joined us here today for this conversation. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Mark, if you'd like to begin the book event today with your thoughts about Catherine's book, Waste.
Excellent, thank you, Gillen. And what a pleasure to share a virtual stage today with you, Catherine. And thank you for writing this book. The first half of the book is an extremely engaging account of growing up in rural Alabama and experiencing racism from a very young age, but also from a very young age, challenging systemic racism head on in different ways and becoming an activist, in part through being on the front lines, literally, of some of the most important civil rights events that our country has seen. So it helped me to learn about racism in America, and Catherine, your personal perspective on some of the everyday realities of those who are enveloped in structural racism. Catherine also shared her experiences with structural racism in the US military. Later, after finding one of her passions as a teacher, also structural racism in our educational system, specifically in several places, including the Washington, D.C. school district, where she experienced things that no teacher or student anywhere ever should have to face. It seems a trip back home in around the year 2000 with her students to the 35th anniversary of the original Selma to Montgomery March really is what led Catherine towards developing her second passion, which is activism, and activism around voting rights, but also rural development, and yes, wastewater. So in several different roles, first with the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise and later with the Equal Justice Initiative, Catherine exposed really through a series of town halls, high profile visits, relationships with local residents and also politicians on both sides of the aisle, and some strategic engagement with the news media, America's dirty secret, right? So starting with where she grew up in Lowndes County, Alabama, where 90% of the households have failing or inadequate wastewater systems, to places also like the Central Valley of California, and even in Illinois, Centerville, Illinois, raw sewage literally surrounding families in their yards and streets in different places across America. So Catherine's approach has always been direct and solution-oriented. She once told a judge in court that there was not an adequate legal foundation to throw the young man that was headed into jail for having a failed septic tank that he couldn't afford to repair. She went to DC in 2002 with an appropriation request to organize the Black Belt Water and Sewer Authority to administer federal funds to repair or install septic tanks in homes cited by the Alabama Health Department. She played an instrumental role in proving that tropical diseases thought to be eradicated from America, such as hookworm, are alive and thriving in some places in this country. And in 2018, she participated in a town hall meeting that was seen by millions of Americans, which included Michael Moore and Senators Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, even had them talking about wastewater. So her supporters also include Jane Fonda, Al Gore. She provided testimony to the Congressional Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment to advocate for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which gives communities an independent source of low-cost financing for water and wastewater infrastructure development. And so I look forward to sharing a bit more with you all today about the organization that I represent, that's Water for People, and the work that we do on water, sanitation, and hygiene in 9 countries around the world. I can do that during the Q&A later. But before I do that, I wanted to share a few of Catherine's own words from the book. She wrote, "I'll fight for better wastewater treatment technologies and fairer public policies for the white people living along the increasingly saturate Florida coastline, the Native Americans on reservations out west, Alaskans on the tundra, Ohioans, Michiganders, and Long Islanders, just as much as I will fight for my home county in Alabama. I will fight for people of color, immigrant communities, and even those who are well off, but without functioning wastewater infrastructure. You shouldn't have raw water sewage running back into your home or your yard, period. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. Although Democrats are the ones proposing legislation now, I'll never forget that some of my earliest help came from two conservatives, Bob Woodson and Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions. When we work together, the United States can use its political clout, business acumen, engineering expertise, and wealth to fix the problem, and I'm working hard to make that happen." Catherine, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. I'm going to follow up with my prepared remarks. Thank you for the opportunity to join this panel and discuss Catherine Flower's energizing and important work, Waste. It's an honor to be here engaging with such an outstanding scholar activist. Since learning about Catherine's work on wastewater and sanitation in Lowndes in 2017, I have taught it in every single class addressing topics of environment, policy, or justice. As a case study, Lowndes has much to teach about issues of environmental justice. Students see firsthand how structural racism and environmental issues intersect to create challenging public health crises and amplify the already debilitating effects of rural poverty. It is a textbook case of environmental racism and governance failure, and has consistently captivated students in ways that no other class material has. More often than not, my predominantly white students are shocked to learn that such injustices occur in a developed country like the United States. Until this point in their lives, they have mostly been taught that the US is a country of wealth, technological innovation, and opportunity, all achievable if only you work hard enough. Lowndes County offers an alternative vision of this American dream, one in which, no matter how hardworking or smart, escaping the yoke of poverty is made difficult without significant external help. Yet that help is rarely forthcoming, and the mere fact of asking for it serves to reaffirm for those in power that a person who refuses to, quote, pull himself up by his own bootstraps is unworthy of assistance. As Martin Luther King noted, however, it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. The beauty of Catherine's book, as well as her broader work, is that she provides an in-depth look into the lives of people pleading for basic sanitation, something that the United Nations considers a basic human right. In particular, Catherine weaves together history, science, and policy within the arc of a moving narrative to illuminate the full and complicated lives of everyday Americans caught within a bureaucratic web of structural and racial violence. Through Catherine's prose, we are able to meet and interact with people like Pamela Rush, who, before COVID prematurely ended her life, became a force for social change in Lowndes County, even as she battled extreme poverty. Such stories convey the tremendous social and environmental challenges that afflict Lowndes County, while also communicating a deep sense of admiration for the way that its residents fight and sometimes succeed to make their communities safer places to live, work, play, learn, and worship, which you might recognize as the definition of environmental justice. As a former history teacher, Catherine simultaneously provides a personalized tour through US Black history, marshaling major historical events to help us understand the social and environmental challenges facing Lowndes County in the present. The careful way in which Catherine employs civil rights history to illuminate Lowndes County's ongoing battle for clean water and sanitation reminded me of a passage in the 1619 Project in which Nicole Hannah-Jones argues that Black Americans have been and continue to be foundational to the idea of American freedom. Indeed, Catherine shows how Black residents in Lowndes, herself included, have historically fought and continue to fight structures of injustice every day to acquire basic freedoms. In this case, the human right to clean water and sanitation. Like the 1619 Project then, Catherine's book reaffirms the American dream even as it shatters it. I'll conclude by saying that Catherine's life and work are truly remarkable. I encourage anyone who hasn't read this book to read it. I encourage all of you to engage with Catherine's work in ways that promote broader learning. Specifically, I challenge you to think about the ways in which Catherine's work and scholarship can help you become an ally in the ongoing fight against environmental injustice. Personally, Catherine's work has helped me understand how deeply entrenched are the US's monuments to injustice and how many diverse people it will take to dismantle those monuments. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing these insightful stories and for taking the time to join us today.
Wow, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, McKenzie. This is, wow. For me to write this book, it has been a life's work. And as a person who grew up in a rural community, it was very important for me to see our stories being told, but also to help the rest of America to understand that life extends beyond the cities of our landscape. And most of our country is in fact rural. I know most people, because they live in urban areas, assume that all of the US, if that's where it ends and that's where it begins. But if we look at a map of our great nation, from sea to shining sea, you're going to see where the cities exist, but a great vast majority of the country is in fact rural. And we have left rural communities, I don't think, not just out of the narratives, but we've also left rural communities out of the policies that is needed for them to be able to sustain life. And I've gone through a number of rural communities in the last several years to see how they're dying, because when the policies are written, it does not include them. And then as we look at climate change, and one of the things that COVID taught us, I know a lot of people that live in communities that are urban and fled those communities last year because they were afraid of COVID and wanted to go someplace where people were not so densely populated. And those areas, of course, ended up being more suburban or rural communities. Likewise, when we talk about climate change and what's going to happen and people having to move away from these coastal areas where a lot of our cities are located, they're going to have to move to the rural communities. And that's why the wastewater issue is so important. And that's why we have to find technologies that work, because at some point, we're going to have to reimagine and redesign the way we live so we can be resilient and survive. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama. And in Montgomery, we've had several major events in the last month. Every week we've had climate events. And those climate events have been primarily, they brought a lot of water, but they also brought a lot of winds, and we had a lot of tornadoes and storms and even deaths in the last 4 weeks. And I think one of the things that in terms of in real time that has exemplified this issue around water and wastewater is what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi right now. Jackson, Mississippi is a place where infrastructure was not able to deal with the climate events that took place. In Jackson, Mississippi is one of the largest cities in Mississippi, but it's also 80% African-American. And I can tell you that when I went to Jackson State University many years ago, when I was a teacher in Washington, DC, we stepped off the campus, it was another world. So I know without even going there that when they had the infrastructure failures, the people in those Black communities, those older Black communities that were denied access to the type of infrastructure that was needed to be resilient were the ones that suffered the longest and the hardest. Likewise in Texas, when the events I just did a TED talk, and one of the things that I referred to as we talk about climate justice and environmental justice, I talked about Texas, because it was a climate event that really exposed the fact that the infrastructure there was not resilient, could not deal with the fact that there were several days of cold weather. But not only did they lose power and electricity, they also lost water and they lost sanitation. I had a friend to text me who lived in San Antonio and said, Catherine, I now understand what you mean when you talk about people having problems and not being able to use a bathroom efficiently. But in the case of wastewater, in a lot of these rural communities where people are straight piping. For those of you that don't understand, if you haven't read the book, straight piping is flushing your toilet and the remains of it goes outside your house on top of the ground in a ditch or somewhere else, but definitely outside and not treated. The second problem is are people that are living on on-site septic systems, and those on-site septic systems are failing. They're failing around the country, not just in Lowndes County, Alabama. This book in Lowndes County was just a canary in the coal mine to the problems that are existing around the nation. The reason that people are listening to this, because we have removed the shame from talking about wastewater. You know, all of us use the bathroom, but in America, we talk about wastewater like, I think the term that we used in one of the papers we wrote was entitled flush and forgotten. People want to forget about it and pretend like it doesn't exist, but it does exist. And one of the things that COVID has taught us, if we do not deal with these issues in one way, we're going to deal with them in another way. And the people that, a lot of the people that have been vulnerable to COVID because of the healthcare disparities, that having no access, proper access to water and sanitation made them vulnerable to other illnesses. And also it kept them entrapped in poverty. But even so, it created an opportunity for COVID to come in and pretty much wipe out communities. In Lowndes County, in Alabama, there are 67 counties. Lowndes County has had the highest COVID infection and death rate in the state of Alabama, and it has less than 12,000 people. I'm not surprised about that. I actually predicted that beforehand. What I did know is that Pamela Brush would become one of the many victims of the people that have died from COVID in this state and across the nation. So this issue is something that we have to address. And lastly, I want to say, I like to say, as we look at these wastewater issues, we have to also look at new technologies. We're still treating wastewater the way we treated before we knew about climate change. That's why these systems are failing. The reason I mentioned Jackson and the reason I mentioned Texas is because that's an example of what can go wrong when we have people that are using technologies that does not deal with the current reality or the future. So I think this is an opportunity for us to engage and for young people to use their ideas, because you're out of the box thinkers, to come up with novel ways or newer ways to treat wastewater. And I'll conclude with, if we can treat wastewater in outer space on the space shuttle to drinking water quality, why aren't we doing this here on Earth? And why do we expect and anticipate that poor communities should have infrastructure that would limit their development, limit the value of their property, and keep them entrapped and enslaved as it relates to wastewater equity? Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Catherine. I just was really fascinated reading your book. And one of the things that, of course, as I was weaving my way through it, that I was doing was really trying to make connections to what the experience has been here in the U.S. And what the situation is still today in so many places. That connection with some of the work that I know you've also been involved with the United Nations and some of their work around sanitation as well. The organization that I'm working for is called Water for People. And our vision is a world where every person has access to reliable and safe water and sanitation services. So what we're doing is we're working in 9 countries. We're focusing on a district, like a county, right? Or a small state in some countries. And we're developing a long-term partnership to establish and invest together with local and national government resources towards achieving universal access to water and sanitation, and even more importantly, create the systems to kind of keep that sustainability of those services going over time. So the focus, again, at that kind of local level, what we're doing is focusing on that universality. So that means every family, every school, every clinic, health center, healthcare facilities. As you all know, without adequate water, sanitation conditions are an absolute disaster. And then with the investment on the water side, it's more significant coming from local governments and national governments, because there were a couple of mentions in the book about just sanitation not being sexy, right? And it's something that where public investment for sanitation is not prioritized. It's a longer term investment, and it's such a kind of a short sort of a society where we've created such a short-term view of priorities and challenges, the kind of the returns on investment in sanitation are perceived to be lower. And so it's been a big challenge for us, I think in part because of that political will and investment in sanitation in the countries where we're working is less than for water. With water, it's much more visible and sexy for the politicians to invest in that. And so we're seeing a lot more there. But our model really is focused on replicating and scaling that kind of district or county-wide approach. And then we're doing that in 9 countries with a small team of about 10 or 20 people in each of those countries that are all nationals of those countries. And their role is to kind of help set the vision and create the plan, and then secure funding commitments to provide technical support to those local governments to work towards that. So I was fascinated to read through and understand some of your work that has parallels to that, and particularly on the water side. I know you mentioned during several of your visits, including to the Central Valley in California, arsenic as a serious issue there in many places in the U.S. Our focus on water quality has also been significant in places like India, where we've partnered with local universities to help develop new technologies for both water and sanitation on arsenic removal. And then on the sanitation side, a technology to help filter pit, and using a ceramic filter that our India team is developing with the university there. So we're excited about the potential for that one. Yeah, so that's enough for me. McKenzie, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to follow up. Thank you for that, Mark, and Catherine. So a lot of students ask me when, right at the beginning of the semester in a class on environmental justice, they ask me questions like, what can we actually do with this, right? What are the jobs? How do you think about careers in environmental justice? And so, Catherine, I was especially struck by how risk-taking you were, right? You shifted directions a whole bunch of times. You just had total faith that it was going to work out for you. And so I was wondering, and Mark, it sounds like you are also kind of seeking through this kind of entrepreneurship solution to these really challenging problems. So how, who's students who are looking ahead and they might have a lot of anxiety about what's going on with climate change and the economy and all of these things, right? What do you tell them to give them confidence to follow these problems and become activists and become kind of the people that we need them to be?
Well, my response is quite simple. I talk to students all the time and I tell them to find the area that they're most passionate about. I mean, there are so many examples. We saw Greta and the work that she's doing around the world and the global recognition that she's gotten. And she's started in high school. And we also have people like Jerome Foster, who's a high school student who was actually protesting climate change in front of the White House, and now is serving with me on the WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I think he's a college freshman now. There are so many areas where we need help. We need help on the policy side. A lot of the people that are writing policy have never been to rural communities. But they're trying to write policies to address these areas and never been there before. And I think that that's a large part of the failures, because of leaving out the voice of local folk who are talking about these failures and why they don't work. But I think that sometimes people are so gung-ho on what they think is the big solution, and then they go in and they just add to the problem and suck up the money that's being used to allocate to try to change this, and then leave stuff that doesn't work. I've been through that in the 20 years that I've been doing this work, where groups come in and say, we got the answer, and people are left with failing systems. So that's why we decided that we would pursue it on our own. And where students can help, there are those students that may be interested in environmental policy. We need them there to be able to advocate for people that are living in these communities. There may be people that have design ideas. We need them there. We need to talk about how we build our houses. I've talked with different groups around the country. I've talked with people from Freddie Mac, who deals with mortgages, to the people from the American Institute of Architects, because that's also part of the solution. How do we design our homes? If we come up with what we think we can do in terms of wastewater infrastructure. The infrastructure that we're talking about is very different from what everybody is using now. And I'm actually hearing from people around the world. I just did a talk last week that was hosted by a group in Amsterdam, because they're concerned about what we're doing. And these are social impact investors. And they're looking at new ways of treating wastewater that's different from the current paradigms. And I think there's a different perspective that comes from people who live with the failures versus people that claim they have the solutions. And we have to go and investigate that. We need people young people that are good with data. Someone asked me today, I got a call from New York, and they want to know, we're trying to find out what the wastewater problems here in 4 counties in this particular watershed in New York. Where do we get this data? Where do we get this information? Nobody knows really, because it's not being recorded like that in a lot of states. And we don't know how many failures we have. We need young people who can design these kinds of studies and hopefully work with us on finding information and collecting this data so we can work on long-term solutions, because oftentimes we're working on solutions without having the data. One of the young people that's working with me is in Lagos, Nigeria, who is an attorney and come from a quite affluent family, but even in Lagos, had to move out of an apartment because they built the wastewater treatment system is failing. And he said that the system kept flooding his home where he was. These are worldwide problems. These are not just US-based problems. And we feel that by flipping the engineering paradigm and sitting at the table when it comes to research and design, the people that are experiencing the failures, the same people that have had to put up with them and figure out, how do I keep this from coming back into my house? Maybe those are the people that need to be sitting down designing what a wastewater treatment system really looks like. Because obviously the people that are designing them are not living with the failures and they don't know. And as a result, we keep having the same problem over and over again. And my understanding is insanity looks like doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results. But I think through the lens of environmental justice, students should learn those principles and then apply those principles. And whether they are in the School of the Environment or like the students I just talked to last week at Massachusetts General, who are medical students and medical doctors, learning community engagement, I think, is going to be essential to finding answers to these problems.
Absolutely, Catherine, and I find your passion is, again, your first words. That's exactly where it is. Find your passion, follow that, and then take the time to really learn more about that. My background is actually in engineering, and I worked for an engineering consulting firm, a private company, for a number of years, but then decided to make a completely kind of irrational economic decision and join the Peace Corps. So I was sent to Honduras. I ended up working in Honduras for about 5 years, a couple of years with the Peace Corps, but then also with Water for People. And one of the things I found when I arrived, I was kind of one of those gung-ho people. Let's design all these drinking water and sanitation systems, and let's get these built. But I during that first year of Peace Corps service, I came across so many communities that had systems that had been built for them, but that were failing already. Many of which for some for technical reasons, but also for reasons around just kind of lack of basic administrative and financial skills, because the systems were built and then the communities were basically expected to manage them on their own without much training or understanding their capacity or experience on how to manage water and wastewater systems. And so of course the result was a bunch of failed infrastructure that I was seeing in many villages across Honduras. And so it was a real learning experience for me, and one of the reasons why I've done very little engineering since then. Most of it's been really building networks and capacity building and training, and understanding really what were some of the core issues of why services weren't sustainable there. So, and as far as sort of how people can engage, I think one of the ways Water for People was born out of kind of the North America wastewater sector. By an organization called the American Waterworks Association, which is based in Denver, where Water for People is based. And AWWA needed a mechanism to offer assistance to communities outside of the US, because they started getting so many requests from around the world for support outside of the US. But they founded Water for People and in 1992, and we've been we've been going since then. And our strategy period for the last 5 years has been focused intentionally on just these 9 countries where we're working. So 3 in Africa, 5 in Latin America, and 1 in India. But we've received a number of inquiries and requests for Water for People to work in the US and Canada in recent years. And we're developing a new strategy this year that's aligned to our vision for 2030, aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Number 6 is the one we're focused on, of course. And with this new strategy, we're expanding our footprint to some new countries, most likely with partners, as a way to increase our impact and influence and contribute to the achievement of SDG 6. So there's, thanks to people like Catherine, I mean, I think there's an increasing awareness about the issues in the US. The gaps are such a cause for concern. It's a time when we're evaluating if the US might be a new country program for us, and you know, would some of our experiences and tools and expertise be able to be leveraged to help solve some problems in the US, and vice versa? Are there some things, some learnings here in the US that we could apply to our work outside? And so one of the things as well is kind of the issue of legitimacy. So could Water for People's national legitimacy in the US be increased through this work? We think some of the answers are yes. And so we've engaged some volunteers to do a landscape assessment of the water and sanitation sector. And as it relates to vulnerable populations in the US, and focused on really kind of 6 different geographies or hotspots, if you will, in partnership with the U.S. Water Alliance and Dig Deep, another nonprofit working specifically on the U.S., looking at places like the Navajo Nation, the Colonias, Puerto Rico, the Central Valley, Appalachia, and the Rural South. And so we are excited about the potential. We haven't made any decisions at this point in time, but we typically engage volunteers to do that type of scoping and scoping work for us, and through a mechanism that we have that's called the World Water Corps. So that's a potential way for people to get involved as well, if they're interested specifically in this particular area of water, sanitation, and hygiene, either in the US or globally.
I'd like to talk about something that we haven't brought up yet. And part of this is sanitation racism, and how oftentimes, because of the lack of the environmental justice approach, there are people that exploit situations instead of going in to help. And they go in with these preconceived notions that I'm going to mention over and over again because I've seen it happen, where people have, even in my work, I've seen people that have almost kind of stalk me, if you will, and go to places that I've gone and go there because I've raised the visibility to raise money to support their cause, but not really caring about the people in the community and taking the time to assess and realize what the real problem is. They get it primarily from going in, sitting in a person a day or two, doing a survey, taking pictures, and they end up on 60 Minutes. And those kinds of groups are going to be calling them out. And other people are going to be calling them out too, because we're kind of tired of this, because this has happened over and over again. And it's part of that benevolent racism that happens oftentimes when people, when it's a hot issue. And I'm really concerned because now the Biden administration has proposed $111 billion to deal with water and wastewater infrastructure. And what I'm concerned about are all these people that are going to be lining up at the trough like they did before. In the 20 years I've been doing this work, some of these same people are aligned with different groups doing the same thing now. And what they do is they put in place systems that don't work. And I feel that what should happen in our community, especially here in the US, and they may be able to get away with it in other countries, but in our communities, there should come with a warranty, and there should come with a warranty and liability that when these systems fail, that they should have to pay or go to jail like I would if I took federal money and did the wrong thing with them. And that has happened over and over and over again. And I can really call the list on folk that are considered valid nationally, or people are aligning with these folk because they have not talked to people in the local community to find out their experience. The same thing is happening in Centerville there in Illinois, where I was recently in a town hall meeting that Senator Duckworth was a part of. And the local people were saying, every time we have this issue and money's supposed to come, by the time it get to us, it's been stepped on so much that we get the same old cheap technology that keeps failing. And we have actually embarked on a year-long project with the Guardian, because one of the things people are talking about solutions and they have no clue of how really widespread this problem is. They only know about it because part of the research these days is just looking at articles and quoting those instead of actually spending the time in the communities and doing the work to go from house to house and find out. That's how we know how many people in Lowndes County don't have adequate wastewater treatment. There are no figures anywhere that has it except us, because we're the ones that took the time to do that. We didn't go and do a statistical analysis on a community that you really don't know how many folk live in that community. In these rural communities, for an example, the address may be Hayneville, Alabama, but they don't live in Hayneville. And folk coming from the outside don't know that, but they will skew whatever data they have because they're using principles that are not based on rural communities and how rural communities are organized. So one of the reasons I'm very passionate about this is because I'm always, every week I'm in a conversation with folk who are well-meaning, who actually, for an example, this week in Montgomery, Alabama, the capital city, there are a number of people in Montgomery, Alabama. There are at least 2,000 families that are on septic systems within the city limits. When I speak with people that are part of the water community, their position is, we're gonna keep them on septic systems because that's the cheapest way to do it. That sounds so much like Flint to me. And what that does is that they wanna put in place cheap septic systems in these communities that they know are going to fail, because we have documented failures. They know are going to fail. And at the end of the day, what it does to these communities, especially within the city limits here in Montgomery, they'll never be able to attract a CVS or Walgreens, any of the services that they need, because they don't work. And then we're also finding that a lot of the people that are coming to us now complaining about these failing technologies are also some prominent white people are coming to us because they bought them too, and they're failing. So we need to be talking about I don't believe that we have the solution, especially in rural communities. I would like to know if anybody puts a system in Lowndes County, are they willing to ensure that that system will fail, and it will not fail? And what happens is with Black people especially, they blame it on education. I hear that all the time. They blame it on education, but the people that are coming to us complaining about these systems, some of them are the most educated people in this country. I wouldn't have a MacArthur Award if it wasn't for me listening to people in Lowndes County. It didn't come because I was so brilliant and I went to this university and I got this degree and all of a sudden I knew the answers, because I went in and I listened, and it took 2 years for me to go through that process. And I'm from Lowndes County, to go through that process and to understand what was going on so we can talk about some real answers. But what happens, we have these people that are like ambulance chasers that go into these communities and propose solutions when the money is there, and then they leave when the money is gone, and they leave with the problems. I've experienced, that's what my next book is about, when I'm going to start calling names of groups and individuals who've actually been part of this process. And it's not going to stop until we start calling them out. And in places like Centerville, where I've gone and I saw more feces on the ground there and toilet paper than I've seen in Lowndes County, the people have talked about those failures. And we're also working with, in The Guardian, there's a place in New York, one of the wealthiest counties in the country, but the Black part got all the failed infrastructure. That's the problem throughout. And I wonder if part of the research that I'd like to do is to be able to figure out who are these engineering firms in these states that are putting in place these failed systems. Who are they? And why do they keep getting the contracts over and over and over again? And they keep failing, and they keep putting people's health at risk. And my role with the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, one of the things that I'm going to push for is on a federal level, some kind of legislation that if you get government money to put in place these systems and people get sick or they fail within a certain amount of time, you go to jail or pay it back. That's the only way we're going to stop this.
That's great, Catherine. I completely agree. And where we see parallels is with our country teams. We hear all the time work coming from the development banks. So the large development banks working in most of the countries where we work will come in, make a major loan for infrastructure to the national government. So it's debt for all of the people in that country. And then the engineering and construction firms come and implement all the work. And then it's not sustainable, it fails. And then the incentives at the development bank are not in place for the development banks to actually make things sustainable. So their goals, their targets are around actually loaning out more money right, to the governments who are taking on this debt and continuing this cycle of infrastructure development. So that really comes clearly into my mind as you're talking about that situation and what you're seeing in the US with what our country programs, the people in the 9 countries where we're working are seeing with a lot of the major multi-million-dollar infrastructure investments that are coming through some of the development banks, which I won't name today, but they can be part of your book if you want to have an international aspect of to that.
I think the problem comes not so much with where the money is coming from; it's the people that get the money. It's the same people getting the money, and it's the same people putting in place these failed systems. And that I'm in discussion right now with people that are writing legislation to give a minimum of $15,000 per household for on-site systems. And the question that I ask is, what warranties come with these systems? And I was told that what they're doing in Whitehall, Alabama right now is they're putting in place septic systems on people's properties as part of a government-funded program. And when they put these septic systems in, they walk away, but they're replicating the same failed system that they have in the county seat. So we already know they're gonna fail. We know that already. But in communities of color, to me, these are just other ways in which we're enabling Jim Crow. Jim Crow was when Black people could only live in certain areas, or Hispanic people could only live in certain areas, or Jewish people could only live in certain areas, and they were denied access to adequate infrastructure. And it is still happening today, but it's happening a different way because people have made this so much a part of their mindset, they don't even realize it is racist, and that it's bad, that it is also part of the unequal systems that exist over and over and over again. So we have to find ways to get around that. And I think the best way as an activist, that's the reason why I didn't take a position in the government, so I can start calling people out. And I'm encouraging other people to do the same thing, because it's a cycle that's vicious. And the whole, the manifestation of people are interested in narcissistic ways of thinking they're helping us, and they're not, because they're not listening. And that's where the principles of environmental justice come in. And then the second part of it is the profit. They're driven by the profit motive. They're not driven by solving the problem. They're driven by making the money. So I think that we have to come up with a way, and part of my role with this, with the WEJAC, is that we're developing an assessment tool that we're going to use to assess this, because that's the only way I think we're going to get to the bottom of it and deal with these social justice issues that are also very much entangled with who has access to water and not. And one of the things I would encourage everybody that's interested in this subject to read is a dissertation that was written by Dr. Brandon Hunter, who just graduated from Duke, called Sanitation Equity. And he talks about his experience going to the Philippines and also here in the US, and how a lot of the structures are set up to enable this inequality. And I remember being on his committee, and one of his professors said, "We are not trained to provide equity." That's one of the things that need to change.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll ask you a couple of questions out of the chat. The first one is, would you say that those writing policies need to become educated about rural areas, or that those from rural areas should be the ones writing the policies?
I think both, because we're not going to be able to stop the people that are not from rural areas to write policies. I mean, we still have a system where, depending on which family you're from, you know, you're going to go to work for that senator, or you're going to go to work for that congressperson, or if you gave a lot of money, that's going to happen. But I think it's also important that those that are writing the policies need to understand the whole United States. It's like, even with me trying to understand the wastewater problem, I had to go to these areas and spend time and talk to local people and engage with them. And I'm still engaged with them. I'd engage with them for a project, have a ribbon cutting, and leave. That's not what I do, because I've seen that happen. We've been the victims of that. So in order to know what's going on, we have to be able to assess long-term. And I believe that everyone, if anybody's gonna represent the US government in any role, and they're supposed to be writing policies that's gonna have a national impact, they need to spend time in these communities. Otherwise, it would be left out. And also, the community should be sitting at the table as well when the policies are being written.
Thank you. So now another question is, in the book, you mentioned that Hyundai opened a large factory in Lowndes County. Could you follow up on that? And I suppose this is a larger question about economic development and its relationship to the particular problem of sanitation and wastewater. Could you discuss whether that the Hyundai plant in Lowndes County had a positive impact on the ability of some residents to put in septic systems, either private residences or through the municipality?
Well, let's first of all start with the premise that most of these septic systems are failing.
Right.
So the problem is, in a lot of cases, they need something other than septic systems. They're failing around the country. They've even I just got interviewed by a magazine in Germany where they're outlawing septic systems in Germany. so anyway, we're not even gonna talk about septic systems. What I am gonna talk about, I think the bigger question that was just asked is about Hyundai. So Hyundai was built in a field. There was nothing there before Hyundai decided to announce that it was coming. And it's not in Lowndes County, it's actually near the Lowndes County line, it's in Montgomery County. There are 2 tier 1 suppliers to Hyundai that are there. The date, just to give you an example, the date that they announced that the plant was coming, I was doing economic development for the county. And the person over the Montgomery Water and Sewer Board at the time held up, we did an announcement at the Capitol, and then the next announcement was in the county seat in the town of Haynesville. They were late coming to make the announcement. We had people there from, Senator Jeff Sessions was there, the person who was over the Economic Development Agency, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce was there, the Assistant Secretary. There were a lot of people that were there waiting. And what took so long was because the person who was with Montgomery Water and Sewer Board, who was in charge of it at that time, was arguing with the people in Lowndes County saying, we want to extend our water, our system to Lowndes County, because where development goes, where sewer goes, so does the development. I'm adding that part to it. So he wanted to extend it where they can provide water to the 2 plants, one in particular that was in Haynesville. Now, let's flip this to 2021. I'm in conversation with these same people who don't even want to run, and that was more than 25 miles from where the pipes ended in Montgomery County. Now I'm in conversation with the same people about the 2,000 or so families in Montgomery that are on-site sanitation, and they're saying we don't build sewers anymore. If the developers didn't put them there when the families when they moved to those areas, we're not going to do it. It's up to them. We're going to make the money go as far as possible, and we're going to put in place on-site septic systems. Now, these are areas that are flood zones. So we already know that that's why their current septic systems are failing. They're within 500 feet of a sewer main. That's the kind of racism that I'm talking about. That's the kind of racism that I'm talking about. They were willing to do it, to extend it to, and and even later, right now, and there's been USDA just gave money a few years ago for the town of Fort Deposit, which is one of the places where we did our parasite study. For the town of Fort Deposit to extend its wastewater treatment to the white businesses on I-65, there's only about 10 of them, if it's that many. They have failing septic systems too, but they extended the town's treatment there. But there are people within 5 miles of the town hall, within 5 minutes actually of the town hall. And those people, we had to step over raw sewage when I went there with the doctors from Baylor. And they cannot get the government to help them. That's when I had a dust up with Elizabeth Warren about that, because she felt she was using that economic paradigm. I write about it in the book. She uses the economic paradigm thinking that helping the businesses will help the community. How can business help communities? And we won't even allow unions in this state, where if you get so many points for a job, you can be fired. And most of the people that got COVID here in Alabama, especially in this part of Alabama, got it working at these factories. So there are layers and layers and layers of obstacles that have been created, economic obstacles that have been created that keeps enabling these same systems, including denial to water and sanitation to exist. Because where water and sanitation goes, so goes development. So it keeps people poor, and it was done intentionally because a lot of the labor here was free. I'm a descendant of slaves. My family still hasn't been paid for all the labor that we did. So right now, there are people with those same attitudes that feel that it's okay in poor communities to keep them poor by putting in place systems that will not allow them to grow. However, they will, in our government, what it does is give money to businesses to expand, but it leaves the people behind, because where COVID and other illnesses can start, it's not gonna stop there. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. It's the same thing that it's the same mentality that thought it was okay for people to go to the Capitol on January 6th and raid it, and they still walking around free, and a guy just got shot to death for a traffic stop. That's the kind of system we have to dismantle. And for most of us, it exists in our minds and we don't even know it. We keep doing things to enable these systems, and part of it is having to unpack it. And one of the basic ways of doing it is through access to water and sanitation.
So McKenzie, would you like to pick up on one of those threads and perhaps pose a final question for Catherine?
No, I'm kind of just enjoying listening. I could probably listen to her for a long time. Yeah, you know, I don't know if I can add anything that would top what Catherine has been saying. So I would rather just let Catherine continue to answer people's questions, because I don't think what I have to say is very important right now.
Okay, so yeah, I feel the same way. It's an honor and a privilege to hear you talk on these issues. And we do have a couple of, you're flipping the engineering paradigm seems to have become a real focus for the event today. And we have a couple of questions that relate to it. One question is, do you find that engineering firms are purposefully stratifying their standard of service depending on where citizens live and you know, where communities are located? And so that's the first question. And another question was, you know, do you see, you know, on a kind of solution horizon or better policy or regulation where there are requirements, you know, warranty requirements for function and durability of systems when firms are applying for federal or state money? Is there a way of solving this?
We're actually pushing for that right now, and I'm going to push forward on the federal level. I'm writing an op-ed right now for the New York Times about that. And fortunately, I'm glad that I have the ear of some people in the White House. I have ears of people on Capitol Hill, because I'm not a Johnny come lately. I've been doing this for a very long time. So now people see that I'm persistent about it. They don't have to worry about me going anywhere, because I'm going to stay here and I'm going to get it done. Because the people that in Lowndes County, these are my relatives. These are not subjects that I can write about and write a paper about and have an article in the, you know, about and go on to the next area. I'm not going anywhere. My parents are buried there. I'll probably be buried there too. So consequently, I have a vested interest in seeing some long-term solutions and not something for the moment until the next group flies in and say that they have solutions, which they don't. So I think that the way to address these issues, one is having this equity tool that is applied, and also putting some penalties to it. If we can criminalize people for not having septic tanks, let's criminalize people that put in systems that don't work too. Let's flip that. And I think in terms of the engineering paradigm, I think part of the problem with it is the way engineers are trained. Engineers are not trained to sit back and see what the economic and social consequences are. They're not trained to unpack racism. Oftentimes, what a lot of our institutions do, we look at the institutional history of a lot of our universities, it was built on racism. And it's become a part of what we do, and without even thinking about it. And that's what we have to unpack. Once we unpack that, then we won't have the problems that we have in the United States right now about racism and around the world, because it's not just a US problem. I did a talk last week on Instagram with an organization that was founded by former Secretary John Kerry. And they had me do a talk with a gentleman who's a member of parliament in the UK. His name is David Lammy. And what David was describing in terms of economic, well, he was talking about climate and environmental justice, the same problems that I'm describing are in the UK. And he talked about Guyana, which is where his family is from. Same problem. Guyana could be Lowndes County. It's the same thing. But I think the way we're going to solve these problems is that we have more people that look like me that are out trying to do the solutions and at the top head of these organizations that are from these communities. I think that's the only way we're going to find real solutions, because my passion comes from the fact that I'm from there. And my passion comes from the fact that I know what a failing septic system is, because I remember it coming back into our home. And I know what it's like to use an outhouse and a slop jar. I know that from personal experience. And most of the people that are coming in thinking they have the solutions don't. So consequently, I have a different point of view and perspective on this. And I'm really concerned about not just a short-term solution to make it look like I have found the answer. I'm looking at finding the real answer. And in flipping that paradigm, we have to talk about the racist structures that have enabled our system and what is built in, and unpack that. And I would suggest that part of going to any engineering school should also include, or any university should include, visiting the Equal Justice Initiative National Memorial to Peace and Justice. Because once you go there and see how in this country, people were killed, Black people in particular, and there were other people too that were killed, and folk would pack baskets and go there to watch it. You know, I remember going with Jane Fonda to taking her there, and she went to, she saw there was one monument for Omaha, Nebraska, where lynching took place there, that her father, Henry Fonda, saw. And she said that impacted the roles that he took later on as an actor, because he saw the lynching when he was a kid. Who would take a kid to a lynching? That will help you understand why we have a Black Lives Matter, why we have a Black Lives Matter movement here. We need a Black Lives and a Brown Lives and a Poor Lives Matter and a Rural Lives Matter movement when it comes to water and sanitation too, because those same issues are embedded in why we have these problems. And I'm sure when we look at these environments, and it's not just water and sanitation, you look at where the polluting plants are sited. You know, right now in West Memphis, they're fighting a pipeline that they're talking about taking through the area, taking through an aquifer that provides water for 1 million people. And and the people with the oil company said that they were going the path of the least resistance. They did that intentionally. Why should we have to keep fighting these same things over and over again? But that is what we're dealing with. But I think that there are enough people of goodwill that are willing to do the serious work that's necessary to find the answers. And I think the answers are with young people, because I believe that young people are not saddled with a lot of these, I keep using the term preconceived notions, and some of them are embedded in our system to make it think that it's okay for one group of people to be treated one way and another group of people to be treated different. And I think young people have a whole nother sense of justice. And justice is also implied through how we build our infrastructure. Who gets resilient infrastructure? Who does not have to rebuild every time there's a hurricane or a tornado? Which communities are people suffering from asthma or people suffering from cancer needlessly? Why does this keep happening over and over again? It's not just happening here in the United States, it's happening around the world. That's what David Lammy talked about. And if you want to see that, if you want to know more about him, he has an excellent TED talk. Go and look him up, and where he talks about environmental justice and he talks about climate justice and the fact that we need to have people or lift up and magnify the voices of other people that are working in this space, especially people of color and people that are from these communities. Like in Kentucky and places like that, there are so many activists that people have never heard about who've been doing this work longer than me. But they're not the ones that can get the access to 60 Minutes or any of the major media. So these other folk look like they're doing great work when these folk are in the community and been there all the time trying to solve problems and can't get money to do what they need to do.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. I mean, you're here at a campus which, you know, where the engineering school is the crown jewel, and it's so important to have someone like yourself come into this campus and bring environmental justice to the center of the conversation and to make it the conversation. And I think you've just demonstrated a remarkable work that you do, and the particular issue that you've devoted your activist life to history, to politics, to education, and to the global horizons of this issue. It's been really quite remarkable and a privilege to hear you talk.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. And thank you to McKenzie and Mark for participating today. We appreciate it so much. And a warm thank you to everybody for attending. Looking ahead, please note that our Congress events are set for next week, which is also Earth Week. On Tuesday, April 20th, Peter Glick, founder of the Pacific Institute, will deliver a talk entitled The Past, Present and Future of Water. And then on Friday of next week, April 23rd, Dr. Joan Rose, the water virologist, she'll close our Water Congress with a keynote lecture entitled From Polio to COVID, Environmental Virology at its Best. Now, both of these lectures are also part of the Center for Advanced Studies Millicom series. You can find Zoom links for these talks on our website, sustainability.illinois.edu, and so please join us. So for the time being, thank you so much for attending this book talk with Catherine Flowers. It's been a remarkable event, I'm sure you all agree, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.